Okay, just Ms. Noonan, there earlier on, you had mentioned that in a meeting that took place with yourselves and the CNAG, where you raised the concern about the 5% and the fact that they hadn't got expertise. Were NAMA at that meeting?
No, it wasn't myself, actually. It was Declan who was at the meeting.
So it was just yourself and the CNAG?
And some colleagues from the Department.
Okay. Is it safe to assume, or is this wrong, that the position of the Department of Finance would more mirror that of NAMA rather than that of the CNAG?
Can I just clarify the concern that Ms. Nolan raised at the beginning? The discussion was less about the discount rate per se, but more about the appropriateness of the process.
Okay,
in terms
good.
of achieving
I'm going to talk about the process in a minute, but could you answer that question?
Well, I think there is an underlying theme in the report that the alternative was to work it out till 2020. And I suppose from a policy point of view, if I'm just looking at it from policy point of view, I didn't think that was an option, given the difficulties there was in terms of the NAMA bonds and the ECB and the kind of pressure we were under to reduce. I don't think that in just as we came out of the programme in the January, February, March 2014, it was an option for us to decide not to sell a really large portfolio purely on the grounds that you might or might not get more money. You had to set a value and decide, is that value for money?
Okay,
and I think that's what NAMA did.
Is that a yes?
Close to it.
Yeah, I think it is too.
I don't.
We established last week, or at least I feel I did in the questioning that I was putting to NAMA, was that in terms of the process, and you mentioned the process that they followed in preparation for this sale, they put their agent in place having designed the process and then prescribed how that process would proceed. We also established last week that if they were selling, for example, I used an example of 10 houses in Westmeath, that the typical process was to source 3 valuations and 3 sales proposals from 3 different sources, and that would then inform. And that would be at point of sale or point of appointment of an agent. So, Minister, would it concern you to learn that following the presentations last week, the PAC established that no current valuations were sought or indeed provided to inform this decision, other than stock valuations that were on file from a date that was some time in the past?
Well, again, I wouldn't have any knowledge really of commercial decisions made by NAMA in terms of valuation or anything else indeed.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm only informing you what went on last week. So we did establish last week that if we were selling 2 3-bed semis in Limerick for a small developer in your own constituency for 200,000, 3 valuations would have to be provided. That would go into NAMA. They'd assess the 3. They'd pick the one they feel was best. They'd typically add a sweetener. That'd be the sales price, and away we'd go. Would it concern you that that didn't happen when it came to the biggest property transaction in the history of the state?
But I have a limited knowledge of the property market, but the value of any property is what a willing buyer is prepared to pay for it on a given day. That's what the value of property is. And it seems to me that whether you bring in third parties to value property in advance of sale or not, that doesn't really decide the price.
What would we do it for the 2 beds, for the 2 3-bed semis? No, with the best respect, Minister, you're a wily old fox at talking down the clock. I'm a valuer, so I do know a little bit about it. So I'm putting to you that if we're willing to seek valuations for smaller, less valuable assets, why would we not do it for the biggest property transaction in the history of the state? Is it a case that when a load of property is together, sure, look, it's whatever somebody is prepared to pay?
It's a matter for NAMA, but if any of my officials who have expertise in this area,
it would be a surprise.
Want to reply to you.
In your experience,
well,
I was 8 years of age when you were First Minister for Finance. In your experience, surely you must agree.
And I respect.
Surely you must agree that to have valuations for the 3-bed semi in Limerick and not to bother for 1.6 billion worth of assets is at best unwise.
No, the point I was trying to make was, in your experience as a valuer, the valuation you put on the 3-bedroom semi in Sligo doesn't decide the price. It's an indicator to the vendor of what price to accept, but it doesn't decide the price. It's the market that decides the price. And, the fact that properties weren't valued, I don't know why they didn't value them individually. There was a lot of them there, but it didn't. I don't know what the answer is. Put it to NAMA. But the point I want to make is the absence of evaluation, in my view, did not change what one would get on the market. What had changed was the assessment of whether best price was got or not.
I hear you, Minister.
But isn't that right from your experience?
In fairness to you, the logic of what you're saying means let's save the money that it costs to run the National Valuation Office because the market's going to pay what's going to pay. So why bother valuing anything? But look, I want to move on. Are you content and confident in the independence of the board of NAMA?
Yes.
Would it surprise you to know that there's been 2 vacancies on that board for more than 2 years?
Well, there are vacancies on boards many times, but they have sufficient for the purposes.
Bearing in mind Section 2 of the Act and the interests of the taxpayers, do you not feel that as the shareholders ultimately in NAMA, that they're entitled to have maximum representation on that board as it undertakes work such as the disposal of 1.6 billion worth of assets?
No, as long as they have the range of competencies across the board, it seems to me it's insufficient. But
it's okay that they've operated below the number designated by the Act.
It's difficult enough to get people for a board like NAMA, and I wouldn't fill it with a make-weight appointment.
Frank Daly last week said, and as a man who we've all seen before many committees and indeed as Chairman of Revenue, is always precise and very specific and to the point. Last week he made a peculiar statement and sounded a lot more diplomatic and political than we've ever heard it before when he said that the board of NAMA decided to listen to the wishes of both governments. So can I ask, what were the wishes of the Irish government as put to Frank Daly, to which you referred last week?
I don't know what the context is.
Well, the context is obviously against a backdrop.
One of my wishes was that they would transfer houses to the local authorities for social housing. Another of my wishes was that they build 20,000 houses. Another of my wishes was that they...
It was nothing to do with that. We're obviously talking about Project Eagle.
I mean, you're throwing it up in the air with no context. I don't know what you're saying.
No. The context that we're here today, believe me, is very specifically Project Eagle. So Frank Daly had said last week, and I questioned him on it.
Well,
he went on to say that we didn't operate in a bubble and we had to be cognizant of the situation in Northern Ireland. So perhaps to put it another way, would there have been contact with yourself and Prime Minister Cameron and President Obama when it came to the disposal of assets in London or in New York?
My advice from my officials is that you're misquoting Frank Daly, and he didn't say that at all.
Well, can you perhaps, is Frank Daly's statement available to us?
So,
it was in his opening statement, yeah. He specifically said that the board had decided to listen to the wishes of both governments. And I'm interested to know...
The record?
Yeah.
Page 2.
Discussion.
It's on page 2.
Do you want to just read it out?
Yeah, it's slightly nuanced, but it says NAMA was willing to consider the wishes of the 2 governments on the sales process because it was argued that commercially the appropriate sales process for Eagle was the targeted one, that it focused on key investors and so on. I'll see if there's another reference.
Yeah. So that's, I wasn't misquoting.
I mean, you'd have to ask Frank Daly, but it seems to me that he may have been referring to the document that Sammy Wilson forwarded to me, saying that PIMCO were available to buy the whole portfolio, and this was an expression of at least the Minister for Finance's wishes in Northern Ireland on how Project Eagle should be disposed of. Maybe it was that he was referring to, but I don't know. You'll have to ask him again when he comes back in.
Indeed. Can I ask, would it concern you that NAMA were selective in the information they provided to Lazard in seeking that expert advice that you referred to, in terms of the fact that they didn't inform them of a fixer's fee intended for Mr. Cushnan?
I have no knowledge of that. Again, it's a question for the NAMA.
And again, in your experience, would you have a comment to say, well, you know, that does seem a bit strange, or I wouldn't be entirely happy with that, or I'm totally happy with it?
It's the only time I came across the issue of fixer fee, so my experience in this area doesn't throw any light on it.
Okay, well, on the basis of your first experience, what's your view?
I don't have a view because I don't know the circumstances.
Okay.
It's a matter for NAMA.
So it's perfectly okay. And then...
No. No.
All right.
Don't answer for me. Just ask questions.
No, indeed, I'm trying to get answers, but I'm not getting them.
Then you're providing the answers yourself.
No, I have to conclude,
No.
in the absence of an answer, I mean, we have to go to what's the balance of probability points to. And the balance of probability is that you don't have a view.
No, the balance of probability isn't that at all. I don't have a legal function.
The legal teams of PIMCO switched to Cerberus, as is now known. At what point was that made aware to the department or you, Minister?
Well, I don't know when it was made aware of the department. I wasn't cognizant of it until very recently.
Perhaps Ms. Nolan?
After the completion of the
After the
transaction.
fact. So would we have a view on that?
It's, in my experience, it's not unusual for advisors who have spent a lot of time and money advising one party who's then exited from a process to try and switch horses. So it doesn't surprise me that they would attempt to get another client.
Okay, and would NAMA, for example, have sought, what do they call them? It's not letters of freedom or
Comfort.
Letter of comfort, yes.
Well, I think we heard last week from NAMA that they did seek such letters from Cerberus to help give them some comfort that those fees would not be payable to any NAMA.
Was the department shown any proof of competitive tension in the sales process post-PIMCO?
Say again?
Post-PIMCO's exit from the process, did NAMA provide the department with any proof of competitive tension at that point?
Well, I think the commercial decision was for NAMA, so it wasn't a responsibility of NAMA to demonstrate to us that there was competitive tension in the process.
Was there any correspondence to the department at the time or since from any entity complaining or who felt aggrieved from having been excluded from the process, not being able to get into the process, or how the process was run?
To the Department of Finance?
Yes, or the Minister?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Yeah, just the very last question. Would the department be aware that Fortress have retained Slaughter and May, the London law firm, to examine the process and the purchase by Cerberus?
No.
Is it a concern for the state that we could face legal action in terms of how this process was carried out?
It's always a concern for the state if we're facing legal action in any area, but we were not aware of any such legal action.
Very, very last question. Minister, do you feel, because the complexion on all of this, I'm sure from a taxpayer's perspective you'll agree, is very, very grubby.
I don't agree with that at all.
Fair enough. That's your position. I'm only a humble taxpayer over this side listening to what I'm hearing from people. Do you feel Section 10 of the NAMA Act was undermined by the diplomatic concerns coming from Northern Ireland?
You mean the independence of NAMA?
No, Section 10 is to achieve the maximum return, I think, for the taxpayer. So did we compromise?
Well, can you put Section 10 up on the screen? Expeditiously is in Section 10.
Well, perhaps it's Section 14. Section 14 is Section 10, as I understood.
Section 10 is about the purpose.
Yeah, the purpose.
About expeditiously.
The purpose, perhaps it's Section 14. In terms of value for money anyway, in terms of the maximum return for the taxpayer, which is certainly mentioned in Section 2 as well, do you feel that the involvement of Northern Ireland's diplomatic concerns undermined the taxpayer on this side of the border's potential to maximise its return?
Are you saying the concern expressed by the Northern Executive reduced the price available? Is that what
No,
you're
I'm
saying?
concerned because of what Frank Daly said last week in the context of listening to the wishes of both governments and the fact that there was some input from there to have hastened a process which may have undermined the taxpayer, the ultimate shareholders of NAMA, potential to maximise the return.
Well, the ministers I met were Minister Sammy Wilson, Minister Simon Hamilton, First Minister Peter Robinson, Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness, and then I'd have been present at meetings of the North-South